Salem, Missouri PD actually called the state he received our request letter and also that he and his detective attended Dane's services. And he has talked to Sally, and in his opinion, and the detective, they feel she's not acting as a grieving widow, but a scared one. Welcome back to Sincerely the Corrupt podcast. This is going to be episode 2, The Evidence. Today, you're going to find me sitting with a bunch of papers in my lap, and I'm okay with that because I do like facts and I want to bring facts. And I don't want to offer you may get an opinion, but if I say an opinion, I'm going to try to say that it's an opinion. Today is all about showing people the truth. And I think that's, our goal. We've kind of talked about that. Our goal today is to get this out there. I was thinking about this yesterday because for a minute, I was like, how in the world could a whole town not know this, right? Or not see this? But when you realize that they didn't. They didn't know this.
It's not their fault.
And there was no rapid social media. There was no podcasting. There was no... You even had to, we've looked at phone records. It was long distance, to even call from state to state. So it wasn't even easy, if people thought so, to figure it out.
No, not at all.
It just wasn't.
We live in a much different time and a much different world now.
We do.
With having information just at our fingertips.
Right at us. Even though we kind of talked about that too, AI, you can't always trust. I learned that real quick. You can't always trust it, but it's really important to have the facts. And it's really good that we have those resources now. And we have that ability. We always talk about the downside, and there's always a downside, but there's always an upside too. And you can look at things a little better than you could back in the 1980s. It's just
for
facts. Sure. Today we're going to be talking about September 7th, and that's a hard day. And it's going to be a hard day to talk about, but we're going to line this out that tells you a story that's a really awful story. It's a horrific story. And it's a story, and if you haven't watched episode 1 and you haven't listened to the motive, you need to. I was a little passionate in that one, and I still am, because, it gets me fired up. Because when you see what happened, you learn from things like this. And even when you're going through a story, there's always a lesson that somebody can take out of this book. And the worst thing that we could ever do to our kids is shelter them like that. The worst thing that we could ever do to our kids is to shelter them in such a sheltered way, because it's a shocking factor. And they're teenagers. If you don't train them or prepare them for life, or prepare them how to deal with certain situations, and you make it out to this is just how your life has to be, and it has to be perfect, and you can't divorce, and everything has to go like this, they're going to fly off the handle. And we don't know what that looks like until it happens.
And that's just not life. That's not life. And for anyone to feel desperate and like there's no other choice, it's it's why we fight for suicide awareness, to think that that's the only choice. It's sad. It's sad to think that anybody believe that death is the only choice.
Only way. And that's hard for me to swallow.
It is me too.
It's really hard for me to swallow in this case. But we're going to walk through it. We're going to walk through it, and I'm going to show you guys this evidence. And I think it's important. And I think it's important that even if you were involved around this and were fooled, we don't blame you.
No.
We don't blame you. We don't blame you at all. All I ask, guys, is that before you claim innocence, read the same book I did. Give me the opportunity. Read this book I did first, and then tell me, and then I'll have a conversation. But until you read this book, you can't claim anything because you just don't know. And so we are going to walk through it.
And ignorance is bliss.
Ignorance is bliss. And we're all guilty of it.
Absolutely.
We are all guilty of it. And we're all guilty of, whatever, but we can't do it.
I don't want to know about that.
You got to work through things. You got to walk through things, and you've got to learn. And it makes you grow as a person when you do that. And you learn, I mean, even digging through this, I've learned so much, and I've learned things about myself that I've had to calm down. But it's just crazy to think that we could do something like this and feel like there's that much pressure. And it's not that everybody, just went on her side. It's just more that it was just the easy thing to do. They didn't know what else to do. There was they didn't see what we're looking at right now, but I want to show you now, and I hope you hear us. On September 7th, we had talked about in the past one, we talked about the motive, and we talked about the RV trip that you guys had taken down. And then we talked about, Labor Day weekend, where they had went back and they had sold a truck to your dad, not visited their family. And so then everybody's back. And during this time, I kind of had a question, is that what was going through Matt's head? Do you guys know during that time, between the time of Labor Day weekend and September 7th, what was happening? Because everything that I read, Jody, and all of these statements that I read, there was no conflict. Nobody knew of any conflict, with Matt and Sally, and that everything looked good. There was no financial issues. Any of the statements in here, there were friends that were probably the closest friends of Sally and Matt that I could find in this case, and they had never heard of anything going wrong.
At Labor Day weekend, everything seemed fine.
And even when
I remember,
and I want to clarify one more thing too, because we kind of talked about you guys had no idea what you guys were going down for in that RV. No. You were blindsided, but I don't think because I think I remember us talking about Matt was kind of blindsided too.
Yeah, I think so.
And he didn't really know that it was that bad at that time.
I don't think he realized at the time that it was homesick to the point that she wanted to leave. She wanted to go back to Missouri right then. I don't think he realized it was that bad.
And the statements tell that story. You know what I mean? They do, because they talk about how, they seemed happy. And, she had actually got engaged in an activity that he liked to do. And when I read through this, it seems like he was actually thinking that things were, she's coming around.
Yeah.
We're kind of getting things together here. And it's horrific how it ended. But on September 7th, the way that day kind of happened, she had given we're going to start with Sally's statement. And I have this in my hand because I don't want to misrepresent that. I don't want to say or put words in anybody's mouth.
No.
And so I'm going to read it from here. And show you. We'll show you on the screen.
Just to clarify real quick, what exactly is this book that you have in your hand?
This book is the case file. So this is all of the evidence that Pat has gathered.
This is what we got about 4 or 5 years ago when I requested information from Las Vegas. So this is not complete. There are a lot of missing pieces. There aren't actual crime scene photos.
A lot of redactions.
A lot of redactions. This isn't the complete file. This is what we received from Las Vegas to satisfy us.
And, the first statement that she made on September 7th, it didn't happen on September 7th. She made the first statement she made was to the Air Force. And in that statement, I'm going to pull that up. I'm going to be digging, because she had actually said they did not go to church or anything like that. First statement, they woke up at 6:45 a.m. They went to breakfast. They drove out to Mount Charleston, the lodge, which Mount Charleston is about 55 minutes away from where they live. Mm-hmm. And then from her statement, she had came back. It was the same kind of story where he had jumped in the car, but that it happened at 1:00 was the first timeline that she had given. And so there was no church. There was no Long John Silver's. There was no lunch. There was 6:45 a.m. They went to breakfast. They went out to Mount Charleston around the lodge, and then they got back at around 1 p.m., and that's the last time she's seen Matt at that 7-Eleven. Then, next statement, story completely changed. And so we're going to pull this too, because That was the Air Force. And what we have from the Air Force, guys, is minimal.
Yeah,
like, let me make that clear.
Extremely
it's
disappointing.
minimal. They have written out her first statement, but then everything after that is just a synopsis of what Las Vegas Metro Police Department did. There was no actual separate investigation, in my opinion, on this. And so then we go to Las Vegas Metro Police Department, and her statement starts there. And then they can kind of take over the investigation at that point. And so they ask her when the last time that she saw Matt alive was. And now this statement to Las Vegas Metro Police was that they were at the 7-Eleven on the corner of Nellis and Charleston. And so investigator says, okay, so on 9/7/86, would you state as to where your husband did that day from the time you got up on through the day? We went to church at Trinity Temple at 11 a.m. We left there and we went out to eat at Long John Silver's and went up to the lodge at Mount Charleston, Lodge and Hotel. He says, okay, what time did you arrive up there? She says, well, I'd say maybe between 1:30 and 2 p.m. that she arrived at Mount Charleston Lodge and Hotel. I want to break here because there's a contradiction here. There's lots of them because you spoke to Matt. This day, this was Pat and Gary's anniversary. What's hard for me to think about, Jody? It was planned. It was planned.
Absolutely.
She chose that day. She knew your parents. Your parents embraced her with everything. And she chose that day. But you had talked to him at 104. There was phone records that I have those here too. 104, you talked to him for 14 minutes.
And that was their time. So that was Pacific time. We're 2 hours behind. I was at home. I hadn't gone to church that day. I don't remember why, if I was sick or what, but so it would have been 11:04 my time. And they called home and I talked to them on the phone, talked to Matt on the phone. Mom and Dad were at church.
Do you remember what he said?
Yeah, they'd been to church. They'd been to church. They were going to go up to the lodge, go up to Mount Charleston area to shoot. Sally was wanting to go shoot. We went to church. We grabbed a bite to eat. We came home to change clothes. We're going to go shoot. I'll call back later. Tell Mom and Dad I love them. Happy anniversary. I'll call them back later.
And so that right there, we know first statement completely false. That couldn't have happened. That couldn't have ever happened. And my problem with the second statement is that's a fact that we have in here.
That's provable.
That's provable
hard evidence. There's circumstantial evidence and there's physical, hard, tangible evidence. And that one is very tangible.
Yeah. You talked with your brother that day at 104 for 14 minutes. There's no way that they had already driven 55 minutes and arrived to Mount Charleston area at 1:30 or 2 o'clock. That's just simply not feasible.
No.
One clarification real quick.
Yeah.
Pacific time is behind us, so our time would be 2 hours ahead.
You're correct. Sorry, I had that mixed up. You're right.
So it would have been 3 our time if that's 1 something their time.
Got you.
Okay.
Gotcha.
My bad. I'm sorry.
No, thanks for that clarification. That's why we have him here.
Yes.
But there's no way that could have happened.
No.
Like she said. And then she said that they stayed up there for about an hour and a half. And I'm gonna continue reading. And so he says, okay, well, what was your purpose for going up there at that time? Well, we've gone up there before and he shot golf balls off and it's cool. Just a nice, and then it kind of trails off into nothing. And then the investigator says, okay, and how long did you stay up there? I'd say an hour and a half, maybe. Okay. She says around there. And then he says, when I spoke to you last evening, after we made you aware of what occurred, you neglected to tell me that you went to Mount Charleston, or did you just overlook it? Now you related earlier that when you were at Mount Charleston, your husband had spoke to some people up there. And so there's been already inconsistencies that we don't have evidence of. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because she has also spoke in that she didn't go to Mount Charleston at all, or this investigator would have never said that. What's kind of weird is that she totally deflects it and he doesn't come back at it. Or are we missing a lot of this? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so he asks, she's describing 2 men. And so she brings up, yes, now they went to Mount Charleston. And she's saying that he saw two men at the lodge. And this is her words, going back to her words. She says there were two men that were standing near us, and they were talking about mule deers that they've seen. He says, was this in the lodge itself? No, this was outside. It was at the lodge outside, and he overheard them talking about mule deers. And he's really interested, and I mean, excuse me, he kind of entered into it a little bit. He didn't know the men, but... And then he says, okay, describe the individuals. And then she starts describing them, probably in their 40s. You know, maybe one was shorter than Matt and kind of overweight. I guess he was kind of balding and maybe grayish hair on the side. And the other man was, he might have been a little bit younger. Probably early 40s. He was average height, maybe about Matt's height. Okay, did you get any of this conversation or overhear any of this conversation? No, I was right there. I didn't talk, I didn't really get into it, but okay, did these people leave with you when you left Mount Charleston? No. Okay, then what vehicle did you drive up there? Oh, 79 Monte Carlo. Your 79 Monte Carlo? Yes. What color is it? Blue. What's your license number? Sally A. A lot of this is just, now he's just kind of asking her about Missouri plates. Yes. Okay, then you came back down to Las Vegas? Because they're Missouri plates, he's asking her, okay, then you came back down to Las Vegas? Yes. Did you stop anywhere? So here's where she starts talking about, she was talking about what they were doing up at Mount Charleston, why they were there. They had met a couple guys that nobody were able to find. And we have to remember, guys, that after these statements were made, there was a reward place for $1,000. That was a buku a lot of money back in that day. And it went on every news station in Las Vegas. It went on the front door of the 7-Eleven. It went through every aspect that you could. And they had requested anybody that had seen a man with two rifles that walked into the 7-Eleven gas station that day. I mean, two guns walking into a gas station. I think I might remember that. But then they're also asking, who's these two men? And was there two men that was up at the lodge that maybe seen something? Nobody answered. Nobody claimed that $1,000. Nobody said that they had seen Matt at the 7-Eleven with two rifles. So I want to clarify that as we're going through this, because it has to make sense.
I would remember if I saw somebody walking around with
and a gas
two
as
long
a
guns.
Clerk. If I was a clerk, and I know the 80s were different, and I'm trying to really grasp that time.
It was different.
It had to have been different. But I cannot think that a man walks in with two rifles that I'm just going to be cool.
Yeah.
First, you know what I mean? Or not remember it. Not remember it enough that I can claim $1,000.
Sure.
So then he says, did you stop anywhere? And this is when she's talking about they were headed back to Las Vegas. And she says, well, we just went on to Nellis, and then we went to the 7-Eleven. We were almost out of gas. And he says, did you have any vehicle problems of any way? Nope. Okay, now after you've gone to the 7-Eleven store, she says, uh-huh. He says, approximately what time was that? She says, this was around 4:00. Okay, so now you would describe in detail for me, please, the time you pulled into the driveway, what you and your husband did. So he's asking her to describe the 7-Eleven. She says, okay, he pulled in, and, there were cars there, but I didn't really notice. And we pulled in and waited, and then he got out, and he says, was this at the gas pumps? And she says, yes. Okay, so you stayed in the car? And Sally says, yes. And then she says he was just getting some gas, and he went in and paid for the gas and came out and then pumped the gas, $5 worth of gas, and said there was a guy in there he knew and that they were going to go and shoot their guns. And he's done this a lot, just that I didn't know. I didn't ask who the guy was or anything, but he had his guns in the car, and he got out, and I, scooted over, and he said, I'll be back in a couple hours or so. And I said, okay.
No name, no car description.
He says, hey, did you happen to see what vehicle he got into? And she says, no, he was just walking up there. The gas pumps are kind of tilted in some, and And I'm like, our head moves. I mean, we can pivot. That's weird. That's strange. That's a strange statement. That's a really strange statement. That's everything, even on this first couple of pages, guys, is strange. And it's two separate, actually, we have three now. 3 different stories, because she told Air Force that they never went to church. They woke up at 6:45, went to breakfast, then they went out to Mount Charleston. They came back. The 7-Eleven happened at 1 p.m. Second time, she never mentioned Mount Charleston area at all the first time she talked to this investigator, or he would have not questioned her as to why she had not. Would you not mention that? Is that not going to be like the first thing you mention? And then when you dig further, she never mentioned the dune buggy incident when he asked her to explain what they did on the 6th. She said they never left each other's side. Well, a statement in here disregards that. He was seen at the Nellis Air Force Base without Sally. And then they did go check out a dune buggy. She didn't mention that part. It's just weird. It's weird so far. It's a lot of lies and inconsistencies.
And when you're telling a story about your husband's murder.
Yes.
You would just think, she was a smart girl, too. I mean, this is not a dummy. You would just think you would want to be accurate and detailed.
And know.
And help find out who did this.
And part of me is so frustrated, and maybe they did. Maybe we don't have access to it. But I've asked, and she could not find them in Vegas either. But we don't have phone records for Betty and Junior at all. And that I'll come back to that in a little bit. But we don't have that. There's things that we're missing, if that makes sense, that could really tie this in. But it's not even necessary when you really dig into it. So then he asked, because she's explained, I'm going to repeat it a little bit, because she says the gas station is tilted, guys. So strange. And he says, on an angle? And she goes, yeah, kind of. And I just didn't think anything about it. Okay, does your husband normally keep his guns in the vehicle? No, he's gone out shooting, He had them in there that day. And okay, what type of weapons did he have? Handguns? Were they handguns or rifles? No, they were rifles. Do you know what kind of rifles? Well, one was a .22 shotgun and 22 gauge. I know the numbers, and she's trying to give the numbers off these guns. Like, did people memorize the numbers off these guns back in the 80s?
Like serial numbers?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
No, that wouldn't be. I mean, it's just a caliber. You've got a 12 gauge shotgun or a 20 gauge shotgun. You've got a 22 rifle or a 243.
So there was a lot of
calibers.
Okay, so you have the numbers and the description of these weapons, and she was actually, talking like she knew the numbers, and so that's what I couldn't.
No.
But
they're in there. I mean, they're recorded in there. Matt had to, whenever we talked about, like when he got the guns out of the armory to bring home when he had his own apartment.
Yeah.
I mean, it was recorded because they were registered with the Air Force.
And you're right, because he did have them there and pulled them out when she came back.
So, it was recorded.
So then we go on, and he says, okay, now from the 7-Eleven, what did you do? Well, I left there, and I went to Kmart, and then I drove around just killing time, really. I couldn't take the dog into the grocery store, and we just went in there for a few minutes. I don't know, maybe a half hour. And I was probably home within an hour after. And so he asked, okay, so we're talking right now about 4:45 or 5 p.m. And she says, yeah, me getting home, yeah. He says, okay, well, you indicated that your husband said he would be home in a couple of hours. Yes, she says. All right, well, when did you become concerned? Well, I wasn't really worried. His dad called that night, and I really wasn't even worried then, because sometimes he's been, his couple hours turn into later. But so I went on to bed, and then I woke up, and he hadn't come in, and I was worried. And she says, well, what time? He says, what time was that? It was about 6 in the morning. So when we go over to phone records, we will say that she started calling family. She called her parents at around, 6. We could look back at the exact timing. It was about 6:30 in the morning. And then she called you guys, or Pat and Gary, at about that same time. And then she said, he said, okay, what did you do then? And she said, well, I just waited, really. You know, my mom called a little while after that about some wedding pictures that had come in. And I called her about it, you know, that I was worried. And she was worried because he was supposed to be in at work, you know, and he hadn't come home. So this is still the night. So I want to clarify that. This is the evening of. And so she's explaining what she did in the evening up until her going to bed. And so she says, I'm going to repeat it just so that you guys understand that it was from that night. She said, I just waited, really. You know, my mom called a little while after that about some wedding pictures that had come in. And I told her about it, you know, and that I was worried and she was worried because he was supposed to be in at work, you know, and he hadn't come home. His uniform was there, so I knew there was some kind of problem, but I just waited. Did you contact the base? Well, there was a sergeant or detective, sheriff, and where Matt's hometown was, where he's from. Okay, and that's in Missouri. And so they've trailed now into the morning. So they've trailed into the morning of, okay, when did we start contacting people? You know, when did we actually start saying, I'm now worried that my husband is not home and we have to start looking for him? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so she is saying, well, there was a sergeant or detective, a sheriff in where Matt's hometown, where he's from, and it's kind of trailed off the way she writes it. And he says, okay, that's in Missouri. And she says, yeah, I think he immediately was going to contact the base. I tried calling the base to the school where Matt was supposed to be, and I couldn't get through. So I called his mom back, and I said I was going to go over to the base and check on and make sure and see if they knew anything at all. So I went over there. And so what she's saying is that, yes, she called parents in the morning, Salem, you know, with Pat and Gary, they were getting concerned. And, you know, Mitch was in the police department. He's probably recommending, and they're saying, call somebody. Maybe we should call somebody. And so it got her to call supposedly Ronald Brown, Captain Brown is what I have. And from that was Matt's sergeant. And so there's actually, and see, I've got my evidence everywhere because I have some in my PDF files. And so I want to bring this up because there's things that are important that we clarify here. And sorry, guys, I have to have some on here and some on here because could you just imagine me digging and finding it all? But Captain Brown. And so this is the report that Captain Brown gives on the incidents of the morning because he's talking about, I was asked by Miss Sally Dane and Sergeant Lewis Shepard for assistance in locating her husband or Matthew Dane. She stated that he had went hunting and he would be gone for a couple of hours, but did not return. I proceeded to ask her numerous questions to include, had this happened before? She said no. What was he wearing? Cam, shirt, blue shorts, sneakers. Did she see who he was with? No. Did she see an auto? No. Did he mention any names? No. Did he say what area he was going to? Desert. See, that's important. It's
not the same
really
as the
important. It's very different than the mountains. And she's never mentioned desert after this at all. She never mentioned he was going to the desert. And the desert is Lake Mead, right?
That area, yeah.
And that's how far from his house?
Oh, goodness. I don't remember exactly. Maybe half an hour. It's close. It's in the Vegas area, but I don't know.
It's important to pinpoint this. And it's important to remember this statement because she's never mentioned desert at all. And now she said desert, and that is a short distance, very shorter distance that if he did actually travel to Mount Charleston that day, already with Sally, and came back to the gas station and found a guy to go shooting with, it'd be the more logical place, right?
You would think.
I wouldn't want to just drive another 55 minutes back up to where I just came from, you know, to shoot for another hour. I would go closer to the desert where I normally go. But she states desert here. And so then she goes on and she's talking about she went to the base and she says, okay, it was a little after 10 o'clock in the morning because I know they break at 11 for lunch and I thought I could wait, you know, until they came out. And he said, did you speak to anybody over at the base? Yes, I was. When I was driving, or I finally found the school where it was at, and I was talking toward the trailer where they have a school, and Matt's instructor was walking out. She says, what's his name? She said, I don't remember. He said, okay, who did you speak to? I spoke to his instructor right then at that time, and he said, are you Matthew's wife? And I said, yes. And he said, I talked or you called earlier, and I said, no. But apparently the man from Viburnum had called or something like that, and he had said, well, you come with me to the duty station. So we went over there, and they had all been notified, and they had all knew about it, and he was looking for the captain. He wasn't there, so we went to another building, and we went into the Captain Brown's office. And then he says, well, what commenced there? She said, well, okay, he knew about it. And said, will you tell me what's going on? And so I just told him. I told him what had happened. And then he said he was concerned. And he said that as of tomorrow morning, he's AWOL. And he was really helpful. And then he had me call the police. So this Captain Brown is the one that instigated the police phone call and the actual reporting him missing. I just want to clarify that. And this was the conversation because Captain Brown was his superior, and he's recommending to Sally that if he does not show up, he's going to be considered AWOL. We need to take this a little more seriously. And he had actually called Metropolitan Police Department, and because they said she had to wait 48 hours, but he said you need to look at this.
Yeah.
And they ended up being able to file him a missing person at 3:00 that afternoon. The problem, that we have with her continued statements is that it just doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense. None of it at all makes sense. So now that is Sally's story. She went to Kmart after the 7-Eleven. Remember the 7-Eleven story because I told it in the motive. Did I? Or I don't, maybe I didn't.
Pretty sure you guys said something about it.
It was mentioned, yeah.
It was mentioned. But the 7-Eleven that's the whole gas station tilt. That's her saying that they had got back, they pulled into a gas station, and he went in to pay for gas with $5 of cash, and he found a guy that wanted to go shooting. And so he ran back to the car, grabbed both of his rifles, just his rifles. That's important too. Just his rifles. And he ran back in the store, and that's the last time she saw him. And she couldn't see the car that he was getting into. She couldn't see the person that he was with because the gas stations were tilted. I want you to remember that. Remember all of that. Then she went to Kmart. Then she went home. Nothing really happened except she called home that night. She said nothing happened that evening, and she wasn't really that worried. And 11 p.m. came around, and she fell asleep. He was hunting. He went shooting, and it's 11 p.m. 11 p.m. in shorts. In shorts. In the mountains. It's not even a proper attire. It's weird. And then the next morning is what you're hearing is her getting Captain Brown. Now we've got police involved. Well, at the same time, we have to understand that a missing persons report was filed at 3:00, but at 2:00, Matt had already been found. And he was found by a couple of hikers in Mount Charleston area. And so Mount Charleston Lodge, where she then originally told this one statement, said that they went, only stayed an hour and a half, came back home, and then he jumped back in the car and he went to the desert, supposedly. His body was found out at Lake Charleston.
Lee Canyon area.
Deer Creek Canyon area. Yeah. And it was target shooting. So I'm going to explain the scene. This one's a little hard for me, and I know it's really hard for you, but I'm going to explain the scene because I'm going to tell you what had occurred. The weapon that was used to kill Matt was his Ruger that held 10 bullets.
22.
10 rounds. His 22 that carried 10 rounds. 26 casings found around him. 26 casings. What does that mean to me? That means a lot to me when you're thinking about and you put this whole picture together. It's sickening for me to think about, really. It's kind of hard for me to think about because she did ask him to go target shooting. And that's what he was doing with her. She shot off maybe she shot off both rounds. Maybe Matt shot off the first rounds. Maybe she shot off the second rounds. But I can tell you that after those first 2 rounds were shot, Matt was walking down to see how good of a shot she was and taking a look at her target. and she ambushed him. Ambushed him with bullets.
That's what it appears like, doesn't it?
First 2 hit the left, first 2 hit the lung. This is why I've made notes. I'm probably going to pull this one out, and I'm going to show you, because these are the bullet wounds found on Matt Dane. And so the first one up here on his shoulder, second one went at the lung, and that barrels you back, right? That barrels you back and flips you back, and the rest of them, she just riddled in his backside.
He fell backwards and turned. And when he fell face down.
6 shots. 6 shots. So that gun was loaded 3 times that day. It was loaded once for target shooting, second time for target shooting, and then she loaded it again and unloaded 6 in him when he walked down there to look at her targets. This is hard for me.
Someone did.
This is hard for me. So I want to bring up a point. There was a profiler that had really dug into this case, because I want to bring up a point here real quick. Men don't shoot like that. The only people that she's identified to be of a question of any sort is 2 men that he had seen at the lodge and a man that he had jumped in with. Now,
who apparently all were
hunters.
Hunters,
guys. That was his friends. They were hunters. Hunters don't shoot like this. I want any of you hunters out there to tell me, if you were going to kill somebody, you'd ever kill them like this.
A human.
A human.
A human.
Human. Like this.
Yeah.
That's a woman shot.
That's what
an
the
emotional
profiler said.
Oh, I know, because I'm an emotional lady, but I ain't going to shoot nobody.
The profiler said that women will shoot in the body. They think with the heart. They think with emotions. And they'll empty the gun. A man will shoot in the head to do the job. And 1 or 2 shots. That's what the profiler says.
It's also a bigger target.
Oh,
you know, it's also a bigger target. But a man is aware that if he's a good shot, he's going right there.
Yeah.
Because he may miss something, and especially if you think you're in threat or anything. You know what I mean? Like that's telling to me.
Yeah.
And that's really telling to me, because every person that she had brought up as being another possible suspect is a hunting male. And that just doesn't make logical sense.
It's suspicious.
It's suspicious. And there was also, there was 4 cans found at the scene, the 26 casings. There was a cigarette butt found. Didn't have DNA back then. We did get fingerprints.
Those things were collected, but apparently there is no usable DNA on any of those, and there's no way to know if they were there before or if they were connected.
We don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know.
Don't know.
Now, we know the 26 casings were from his weapon.
Yes.
And his weapon is what was used to shoot him. And remember that I just said it had to have been loaded 3 times that day. It would have had to have been reloaded 3 times. So when they started, it was about a few days later, and I don't think anybody initially automatically assumed it was Sally. I don't think that happened. But what started the whole was they had actually went to get Sally's car to make a reenactment video to promote that $1,000 reward to get some information. So they went to use Sally's car to do so. And all of Matt's ammo was in Sally's console.
It's left in the car.
His guns were found on the 11th. And let me pull this up, because now my timeline's going to help.
The 11th, about 4 miles away.
4.1 miles away. And it was in between. Now, this is important too, because when you're talking about Mount Charleston Lodge, it was in between the lodge and her way home, her direction back.
Yeah. From the murder scene, it would have been on the way
back
to the city.
And found by hikers. So the ammo in the car, how did he load his gun, Jody?
He wouldn't have.
He wouldn't have been able to.
No.
He wouldn't have been able to. And
he wouldn't have forgotten.
And I want to clarify, there was no ammo found with that gun.
No.
There was no ammo ditched, but the rifles were ditched. Fingerprints were taken. The only prints found on the weapon were that of Matt and Sally's, both fingerprints found, and Sally's palm print found on the weapon, the murder weapon.
Which is explainable. Do you know what I'm saying?
It can be.
Yeah.
It can be.
It's explainable.
But not if you're an avid. But hunters got to think about this for a second, because an avid hunter also wipes his gun. You don't leave oil on your weapon.
No,
you don't do that. You don't leave oil on your weapon.
And there should have been other fingerprints if
somebody
else had pulled the trigger with Matt's gun, because he was killed with his own weapon.
Yes.
So there should have been other fingerprints, or theirs should have been smudged. If somebody had gloves on, hypothetically, those fingerprints that were remaining should have been smudged.
Would have been smudged. There's no other way, And I want to be I want to be a devil's advocate a little bit and try to look at this case and make sure that we're looking at facts. But
Me too.
They are. It's
too.
factual.
We always have. Like I said last week, we absolutely had to have this laid out for us, honestly, with crayons, because we just simply did not believe who they were presenting to us as a suspect. We did not believe it. We didn't want to, and we didn't believe it for some time.
Yeah.
Until the evidence just kept stacking up.
And part of the problem is that, because we're going to talk about a statement that we had from Randall Reeves, because this kind of ties it in too. When we're talking about the fingerprints, and all of this, she tells in her statement, let's go back to Sally's statement. I got to go back because I want to read the facts. And so, in her statement, she's talking about, they're asking him questions about what does Matt do? She asked him the questions of, did Matt drink? No. Just totally negated a lot of the things that she had said in the past. But she was asked about her shooting. And she says, not very much, not very good. I had him show me once about a couple weeks ago. I shot his weapon about a couple weeks ago, but only once. And that was then. And I'm not very good. So I want to pull up Randall Reeves' statement, because Randall Reeves remembers something very different.
And he was a airman?
He was an airman.
He was an airman.
And he doesn't claim to be Matt's best friend, but he does claim to be to know him.
He worked with him.
Yeah. And so they talked a lot about hunting. When guys work together, you're going to talk about your hunting experiences, and Matt was excited. Matt had been super excited. And he says, as far as I know, Dane was not experiencing marital problems. Recently, he had been spending a good deal more of time with his wife than he did when I first met him. Dane had mentioned that his wife had become very enthused about going shooting with him and had become a good shot for a beginner. Yeah. Guys, this is eye-opening. And I'll let you read this book. If you call me, I'll let you read this book. I'll let you read it. But it's really bad. It's really bad. It's very significant. The dune buggy money. I don't know how that plays a role. I'm trying to figure it out. But there's something with it. It's so weird. Why wouldn't she mention that? Yes, the day before. If you're just...
We had some money.
Yeah, we're going for a dune buggy. Or even if she didn't, if they just looked at a dune buggy. If he really didn't have a check, because Gary can't remember. And all we have is Randall Reeves' statement that also said Matt states he received a check from his dad.
And they were going to go look at a dune buggy.
But she didn't even tell him about the dune buggy. There's something to that. Why? What's weird about it? It's so strange. It's so strange. And it keeps coming and coming and coming. And then when the evidence started piling up, and then she gets, arrested, it just, after that, the powers that wielded over was just astronomical. It just was. And I think it came out of Vegas.
Yeah, it started there for sure. As far as the 7-Eleven, I believe they did pull surveillance tape.
That's right.
Matt was never seen in the 7-Eleven. There wasn't obviously in 1986 there weren't cameras everywhere like there is now, but there was surveillance tape. You're in Las Vegas. There was surveillance tape. Matt was never seen in that 7-Eleven at all.
Now
wasn't there.
And now the only thing that was told is that they've been recorded over.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just, and I'll tell
pitiful.
you, it is pitiful.
It's pitiful.
It is pitiful. And, you know, I have talked with the homicide detective, and we have been looking at things. And I think she's looking at this just like we are.
Yeah, she's anxious to help.
She is.
For sure.
She's anxious to
and
help.
I love that. Thank you.
But we've been you've been duped through it, you know, because now it's not about now because we have all the proof. And I remember having this conversation with her because she says, we got to find, you know, we got to have that one more thing. I'm like, but you have it all. I mean, in my eyes, I'm like, we have it all right here. It's all right here. Like, all you got to do is read it. Yeah. But when we see what happened with our grand jury and everything that occurred after
we'll
the
go
fact,
into that.
we are going to go in. That's next episode after the fact. But it's terrifying to a way that a family could be this oppressed and this brought down by power and money. It's shocking to me. You know, I want to make sure, and because I don't want to miss any evidence on September 7th. I truly don't. You know, and so I want to re-look back.
Real quick, one of the things that stood out to me, what you were talking there, and I'm trying to just see this from a total outside perspective from the people listening or watching to this, is the guy who was contacted at the base, Brown, I think you said his name was.
Mm-hmm.
He said that she told him that he was going hunting.
Not shooting.
Hunting versus going shooting are two totally different things.
Very true.
Shooting, you said he had shorts on, right?
No big deal. It was September 7th. It was hot.
Going for shooting with, you know, shorts on with a random guy is one thing, but going hunting, you got to have like hunting apparel.
And
like,
a tag.
Yes.
Yeah,
you know, you can't just go hunt.
There's a lot more preparation that goes into hunting than shooting.
For sure.
So the fact that he said that she said that he went hunting with that guy.
And again, just contraindications. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of just and is it something that got lost in translation or is it a lie? You know, and we have found a few like little typos, little things.
There are.
But and there are things, it's a long time ago. There are things that I don't remember. There are obviously things that my dad doesn't remember.
Yeah.
And we all know, especially in grief and in absolute trauma, there are things that each person is going to remember a little differently.
And sometimes we put our own twist on it when it's been 38 years. You
For
know what I
sure.
mean? It's kind of easy to do.
Yeah, for sure. There's things that, and again, that's what I've been very clear. We've talked so much about this. I've been very clear that we don't want to come across as mean, vindictive.
No.
We're coming for you. We're out for blood. That's not the case.
No.
I want the truth. And I want, you know, I've been hesitant to even say her name, but I want the suspect.
I'll say it for you. Sally.
I want the suspect. Prove it wasn't you.
Yeah.
Clear your name.
Or
if it wasn't, or you were offered a lie detector test back then.
And now. That's true. I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to mention that too. And I also wanted to mention it wasn't just like one time she said hunting, one time she said shooting, and one time she said golf balls. That's true. That's true.
And there was another story that I remember when I was young that was just the guy from 7-Eleven. We were going to go up in the mountains and look for the mule deer because the mule deer were moving, apparently. We were going to go look for mule deer. Why do you need guns to look for mule deer? You don't have a tag. You wouldn't need guns to look.
But I mean, if you take your guns, you should probably take your ammo.
You would think.
You would take your ammo. It wouldn't be sitting in the car 3 days later. You know, and it's just tragic that because I've thought about this long and hard because I don't understand the mentality of somebody that can do something like this. You know, and I've tried to be a devil's advocate and say, well, was she traumatized? Was she sheltered? That's crazy, though.
Was he abusive?
To shoot somebody?
Was he mean? She says in her statements, no.
And I can prove to you, I promise you, come read these. He was not.
No.
Matt was not abusive.
They weren't having fights.
She never claimed it.
He wasn't drinking. He wasn't in legal trouble. He wasn't in any kind of financial trouble. She did hint to that down the road some.
Not initially.
Not initially. Down the road some, she hinted toward that a little bit, I believe. That, oh, well, he drank a little bit, and before I got there, he did something. He was 18. He was in the service. He was killing time, you know.
But in here, no. And she even said, I mean, there was a statement that said, well, you mentioned that he kind of goes off every now and again for a few hours, and she said, only to hunt.
Right.
Only to hunt. And we are willing to show this. You know, we're willing to show this to everybody. But it is, to me, this is what something, when we go too extreme in a certain area, you create sickness in the brain.
Oh, yeah.
You create mental issues in people's brains because I just don't believe that somebody's born this way. I don't believe that, and maybe they are. Maybe there is I'm sure there's certain aspects, but to live your life and then get married and all of a sudden you murder someone to get out of it, how does that happen?
I don't know.
That's what bothers me the most is that it was a young child. And if I could make any sort of cry to Sally right now, it would become, come clean. Come clean. You were young. You did the most horrific thing that I think I've ever read. But come clean. If you truly fear God like Daddy taught you to, then you should do this right now. Right now. And then there could be forgiveness. And I know the Dane family. They'd let it go and they'd forgive and they'd move on. But something has had to happen. I hope that some sort of maturity has happened. And I hope that some reflection has happened. But you need to take ownership of these facts. And I'm not going away until you do. And I believe it's important that we all learn a lesson from this. Don't shelter your children. Teach them to live in a world where they can understand and engage with others. And don't, it kind of brings me up about let's
choices.
It's Christmas,
there are always
right?
options. There are always choices. When you're in a bad situation, even if you've done something wrong, you've messed up, there are choices.
There are choices. But when you make the wrong one, you still have to own it. You have to be accountable.
You're free to choose. You're not free from the consequences of those choices.
And this has rocked me this year. I'm not going to lie. I think I have 2 gifts under the tree for each boy because all I see right here is money and greed. I see money and I see greed, and I know that I got to scale that back. You know what I mean? I got to scale that back. But we also, as humanity, have to scale this back. Yeah. And not think that we should be throwing 25 gifts at our children. And then, then they grow up and they're like, well, I'm spoiled. Well, now we have the generation of the coddled. I think I told Kelby that the other day because I heard that. And it's not wrong, right?
Yeah, it's right.
Because we go from generation to generation and we kind of switch things up. But we've got to come back to grounding a little bit and realize that money, sure, we need it. I need it to do my podcast. I need it to do the things that I'm passionate about. But it cannot be this powerful. Why is it this powerful? Why is it the only thing that really can get things bought? You know what I mean? And we got to scale back.
Yeah.
We got to scale back. But I will share this with anybody that would like to read this book.
Yeah,
I will.
For sure. There are a lot of discrepancies, and they call it circumstantial evidence.
They do.
When it's overwhelming circumstantial evidence and it all lays in together, like the phone calls. Did you go home at 11 o'clock and go to bed, or were you on the phone that night?
Yeah.
Because you were.
And the phone records show us she was on the phone.
She was on the phone.
She was on the phone.
The went to sleep and woke up and nothing happened in between is complete lie. Why?
Oh, I'm so glad.
Why? Because if my husband was gone, I would have been up all night.
I'm so glad
I would have
you
been
just
up.
kicked me into gear because there was a big part of this that I almost forgot to talk about because a couple phone calls were made on September 8th.
Yeah.
And it was early in the morning. It was 6:37 a.m.
There was one phone call that was made anonymously.
That's what I'm talking about.
To the Mount Charleston Ranger Station by a female to see if there'd been any accidents reported.
And that was in a statement
and that
I had back here.
That was in the phone records.
And we have audio of that. That conversation is on audio. And so she called. Now remember, this is why I said remember the desert. So I'm glad you kicked me back into gear because she said, oh, he was at the desert. But for some reason, she called first thing in the morning to the forestry department and claimed that he asked if there had been any accidents in the Mount Charleston area. Any accidents over the past 24 hours. Would not give her name. Did not say, my husband went hunting and has not come home. Have you seen a man? She said, has there been any accidents reported within the last 24 hours? How did she know he was at Mount Charleston?
Why would
and if you
that's
lost
very
your
random.
husband, why would you not say, my husband went hunting and he is not home? I'm kind of concerned. I know it's too early to file a missings report,
but I'm looking for him.
You don't call and just question, ooh, have they found him yet? That's what she was wanting to know. She's wanting to know if they'd found him yet. And she didn't want to give her name. And she didn't want to give her situation because she knew he was already there.
Yeah.
So this was all about the evidence and the facts of the case. And next time, some weird stuff happened. I'll be honest, weird stuff has happened in this case. I think we've seen it, and I keep finding it, and I don't know why it's so weird. I don't think we can quite understand it yet.
No.
And I want to look at it, but it's power and money. If you really want to lay it out, it's power and money is what took over this situation.
I have a question to wrap up maybe.
Okay.
What led up to her being arrested?
They started trickling the evidence. And so that's a big piece that I don't have a lot of info in this book on. And so, for instance, it started triggering when they saw the ammunition. Then they started investigating her, and they had finally got enough to go do the warrant and actually go arrest her.
Yeah, and you have to go with statistics, too. I've watched enough CSI to know that you have to go with statistics. There are very, very few random murders.
Yeah.
Especially in cold blood, shot 6 times. It's not very, very, very few statistically are random. Number one, you look at family members because most of them are done by a family member. They just simply are. And then outside of that, then you look at contacts.
Yeah.
And who have they got problems with? Who are their business associates?
Yes.
Who do they owe money? Who has any kind of a reason for wanting this person out of the picture?
Which is why it's so weird how the Air Force handled this. You know what I mean?
Oh my gosh.
It's so strange.
I don't guess I realized it at the time. I
I'm
knew
going into that on episode 3 too.
Yeah, I knew it sucked that she got murder money so quick. But how did it happen?
Promoted murder money within a month.
That happened like it did. That there was a payout that quick when she was the suspect.
Within a month. It's strange. It's weird.
Bizarre.
And they don't. And there's a lot of there's letters here that even Bob Roney has said. There's just so much resistance that I see coming back from the Air Force.
Yeah,
and that's disappointing to me.
And other circumstantial things, as far as laying out evidence, the behavior afterward was different. The Air Force came and, packed all of their belongings up to ship home. They all had to be packed separately. Sally was very specific about that. She didn't want her things packed with Matt's things. The day of the funeral, we had to stop on our way home from the cemetery to pick up the dog, Matt's dog. She didn't want the dog, not for one more second. You got to take the dog. All of Matt's things. I I actually reached out to her husband several years later, probably about 92, 93, and asked for Matt's things that were shipped to her parents' house. And I was able to get, apparently there was a flood in their basement and a lot of his things were ruined.
Reach out to who?
Sally's husband. I reached out to him. No, I reached out to him. Yeah.
Like who it is right now?
Yeah. In probably 93 or so, and requested my brother's things. I called him and left a message and said.
And he called you back?
He did call me back. Called me back and said, if you get an address, if you give me an address, we'll ship these things to you. A lot of it was ruined in the basement, but we got some things, few things.
Good.
Yeah.
You should have.
Yeah.
You should have. And next time we are going to talk about that a little more. And we're going to go through kind of the aftermath a little bit, kind of call it the aftermath too, because that's kind of what it is.
Yeah. And just the fallout, things that happen afterward, very odd behavior.
It's weird things happening. And you never
know how you're going to act. You don't know how you're going to act whenever something like this happens. You just can't say, none of us, and I hope no one ever has to. But some of the behavior was just really
weird.
Odd.
Odd.
There were people at the funeral who later commented about how very bizarre her behavior was.
Funny that you say that.
His honor guard.
Chief Shaver, Salem, Missouri PD, actually called the state. He received a request letter and also that he and his detective attended Dane's services. And he has talked to Sally, and in his opinion, and the detective, they feel she's not acting as a grieving widow, but a scared one.
I've never seen that. I guess I don't remember that.
Mm-hmm.
That bizarre. There were several people. Joe Sparto, Matt's honor guard that accompanied his body home, was very bothered by her behavior.
Yeah.
Our former pastor at our church. We didn't know it at the time, but like I said, circumstantial evidence is just that. But when it's mountainous and when it's piled on with some physical evidence as well, it becomes a bit overwhelming and it becomes extremely hard to deny.
Yeah. And it's in this book, and I think that's why it's just been softened and easy to be silenced, because nobody has seen the same things that you guys have been looking at.
I'm excited. That's right. And I don't blame anybody for believing someone's story. I would hope that my friends who know me now, if they met me and I was accused of some kind of a heinous crime, they'd say, no way, she's not capable of that. And they'd never give it another thought. I would hope that.
Yeah, you're right.
So I don't blame anybody. I don't blame anybody for these are small towns. Our families are all intertwined. I don't want to make enemies of people that I've known and loved my whole life and who have loved us and I don't want to make enemies of anyone, but I'd like to see my brother's murderer
get soft,
pay for what happened.
Yeah. As you should.
This is unfair. This was a real crappy hand that was dealt, and he didn't deserve it.
No, he didn't.
No.
He didn't.
My parents didn't deserve it.
Mm-mm. They sure didn't. Especially on their anniversary. That's the one that's kind of really hard for me. I'm not going to lie. Because that's evil.
When his headstone was ordered, this is something that we'll go into, but his headstone that was ordered by his wife says date of death September 7th. His official date of death is September 8th. That's what his footstone says from the Air Force.
Because they said that they could actually not tell.
Pinpoint, which is crazy to me.
Right.
That they couldn't pinpoint a time of death. Come on. But
she made his tombstone 9/7. And that's because she knew. She subconsciously put that date down because she knew exactly what his date of death was. Yeah. And it's hard. It's not hard to say after you read this. It may be hard to listen to, but it's truth. It's
true.
And
that's what I want to understand. I want people to understand too. I know there are people hearing this that think, how dare they? Mm-hmm. How dare they say that? Mm-hmm. Well, how dare someone murder my brother?
Yeah. And I dare you to tell me she's innocent. without giving me the chance to show you this first. I dare you on that. Because that's what we do as a society sometimes. We want to claim that we know, but we don't want to actually look. So you don't get the right to tell me that she's innocent unless you sit down with this book and can show me different. But next time, we're going to talk about the aftermath, and we're going to tie this in, and we're going to get, information out there. And I truly do hope that something is compelling in this woman, that she just comes clean. I really do. I hope she just comes clean. I hope, this can't be easy to live with, especially with a redheaded podcaster chasing on your tail. I mean, it just can't be. You know what I mean?
No, and that's something that I've prayed since I was 14 years old, is that whoever pulled that trigger sees his blue eyes and his face every time they close their eyes. That's something I've prayed for.
She does.
Lord, let him see his face every single time that they close their eyes. Every time they lay down to rest, every time they close their eyes to say a prayer, every time they close their eyes for any reason, they see my brother's face. Yeah. And they know what they did.
They will.
I hope.
They will. And we are going to talk about all of the defense and all of the aftermath on the next episode. Thank you for watching Sincerely the Corrupt podcast.